Every person has a dream, whether it's being an astronaut, becoming president, or becoming an OnlyFans model so you can look like a gremlin at home 80% of the time. And Dragon's Dogma 2 is going to help people achieve their dreams. Let me expand on that. It's really going to help a certain group of people, and that's people who have been waiting on this game since the first Dragon's Dogma. Let's sit back and look at where the story starts before we get to the present. Dragon's Dogma was released by Capcom on May of 2012. It was an open-world, role-playing hack-and-slash game with a total of 9 different classes to play from, and a variety of playstyles to do the changes in tactics from the choices in each class system, including different branches for each kind of class. One of the main purposes of the combat system was to be designed in a way where someone who isn't skilled in action games can also enjoy the experience without worrying about racking up a death toll like in Dark Souls or other difficult action games until later in the game when you're more acclimated to the combat system. There is a lot added to the game to give you a real action fantasy experience, such as the pawn system, which was adding AI to the companions with options and commands, so it feels like there was more life to your companion characters, including giving you hints going towards assisting with missions or yelling out hints on how to defeat difficult enemies, or a real defining trait that gave players a much closer kind of combat experience, which was the grab mechanics, which let you grab and climb onto larger enemies. The director of Dragon's Dogma, Hideki Itsuno, was quoted saying, "You don't get the full effect of fighting a giant boss," which is a partial quote. It's referring to the fact that typically if you have a giant boss battle or giant battle in general, typically you have to just attack their shins until you get a special move that knocks them over, and for a small window you get to attack a different part of their body. But he wanted something a little bit more grandiose and on a smaller scale, sort of a Shadow of the Colossus effect when fighting bosses inside of Dragon's Dogma, and have a real chance to feel like the main character in a fantasy world where you can climb onto the beast and start jabbing things into it and just start attacking it from the actual body itself, since you have companions also leading aggro onto the monster. It's even more impressive considering Itsuno had a much larger scale for the concept of Dragon's Dogma and still released this banger when Capcom executives had doubts about this type of game and provided a much smaller budget and resources than what he would have needed for the kind of game he wanted to make, which is ridiculous considering Capcom hadn't made something like this before, so some skepticism is totally understandable, but at the same time, not taking a chance on a guy who constantly made you profit after profit is a little bit silly, you know? And you know what else is a banger though? My channel. Go ahead and slash that subscribe button and help me get to 1,000 subs. Now let's get back to glazing this game a little bit, alright? There was a lot of praise for the game, where pretty much no major outlet had given it less than a 7 out of 10, except for Play Magazine out in the UK, since at least one person had to be incorrect. Like, it's like the dentist thing, you know, 9 out of 10 dentists agree. But the game garnered so much attention anyways, that it actually got an online game that came to an end in 2019 due to a lack of players, and an animated series made by Netflix back in 2020. But coming back to reality 12 years later, the game releasing now is of March 22nd of 2024, and everybody waiting for this bomb-ass fantasy game in the making. There's plenty of gameplay to show how much more polish this game has and how much more rad all the classes look so far. In this game, you get 10 classes instead of 9, with some changes to the vocations in the sequel. They got rid of Rogue, Strider, Assassin, and Mystic Knight from the original game, and instead the vocations are now Fighter, Archer, Thief, Mage, Warrior, Sorcerer, Magic Archer, Magic Spearhand, Trickster, and Warfarer. With the name of some of these, it's clear they tightened up on some of the classes like Rogue and Assassin and just made Thief to replace them, but others are also just added to new playstyles and new options for weapons, like making much wider range tactical decisions, or just being able to have a variety within your party members, such as the Trickster, which is probably going to be more of an illusion class, and Warfare, which is just their version of a Vagrant, which uses multiple classes, weapons, and abilities. With these new classes, they also added NPCs in the game that are considered masters at their vocation, and depending on your relationship with them, they will grant you their vocation if you want to change vocations, or even give you special skills for their vocations, depending on the relationship and interaction you have with the NPCs, which gives you even more reason to try to interact with as many NPCs possible inside the world and just kind of play around with what class fits you best inside the game. It's very clear that everything Itsuno didn't get to put into the first game, he finally got to put in this one. Along with the fact that he did say he focused more on polishing and expanding on the current systems from the first game, we're going to get a much more in-depth world not only for the combat and class system, but how you interact with your companions and how you interact with the NPCs in the world itself. For a large amount of the Dragon's Dogma audience, this is exactly what this game needed. I loved everything that Dragon's Dogma 1 was, including all of its flaws, but the fact that he did take time to focus more on polishing all the things that weren't perfect in the first game gives me a lot more hope that this game is going to be just absolutely spectacular. I do believe this game is going to be on several people's top game of the year list, if not one of their favorite games, period. Not even mentioning the story, which was amazing in the first game, and getting a chance to go back and see what kind of adventure they put us through this time gets me as giddy as a schoolgirl whose daddy just bought her first Audi. There's a clear love and care being put into this game, and they have a director that put all of his time and attention into making an intricate world and an in-depth adventure that will lead you to sacrificing hours of your life in order to find all the secrets in this game and just be happy you did it. I mean, it's absolute Stockholm syndrome with these kind of games when you have hundreds of hours of content to go through, or even over 60 hours of content to go through. It's similar to when I played Witcher 3 and all the DLC. It was just like I was a slave to it. I absolutely just had a collar chained to my desk and I played through all of it as much as I could. Of course, there will always be concerns that we could address. With every amazing game, there will always be things to nitpick. I think the number one thing that the audience will look at is the story or how much content there is outside of the main story, which I think is fair. Dragon's Dogma left a precedent back in 2012 for open world games, and there's been many of them made since then. And now I hope there's a lot of things you can do when the story is said and done inside of Dragon's Dogma 2. I think there will be. I do have my hopes for that. Among some of the things to be said that fans could be worried about, I think the possibility of the story not stacking up this time is always there. I have no doubt the mechanics in the world is going to be amazing, but if there's something that could possibly disappoint, then I would say the story is the biggest thing I could foresee going wrong. And not because I believe the story will be bad, but purely from a devil's advocate point of view, that there is room for them to make certain parts of the game lackluster. While I believe in Itsuno and his team, I don't believe in Capcom. If any of the executives get in the way of how things go, then it can pretty easily fall flat. And unfortunately for a fan base, slightly bad mechanic can be forgiven, but a bad story in a story-driven open world can lose an entire audience pretty quickly. The other thought I had that could disappoint some people is if the companions don't have much input or a shallow backstory themselves in the game. In this kind of game, having an interesting back and forth with your companions can add an extra level of involvement for the player. Not to mention, some gamers really enjoy going through every companion side quest and background when the games like these have them to be operated, and a lack of those kind of story elements I feel like would be pretty short-sighted inside of such an IP such as this one, especially considering they put so much advanced AI into the NPCs, from the companions to the random ones you find into the town. Now, with all that said, I think this game is going to take it all. With such an impassioned team and director at the helm, a nice length for the development cycle, and the hype waiting for this title, I do think this game is everything the fans have been dreaming of for a sequel to the original Dragon's Dogma. I could be putting the cart before the horse since the game isn't out yet, possibly. But nothing from what I've seen so far nor talked about has made me skeptical of the size and quality of this game. The original was great, and that garnered enough trust that I want to believe this title will be one-upping the first game entirely. I think for the fans of the series, it's going to be an absolute slam dunk, especially since it's not an early access game, unfinished, but a true polished experience that will give the immediate value for the cost of the game. And considering how much change there is in this game, I feel like I can confidently recommend people who haven't played the first game but are interested in this title to get the game, or even get the first game as well. It still holds up a decade later. All I can say for me is that I think it's going to achieve all the dreams and expectations I had for this game. I think it will for a lot of others as well. But if you watch this far into the video, thank you so much. Go ahead and click on one of my other videos. I always try to make as much time as possible to make these videos for you guys. I appreciate your time, and until next week, I'll be seeing you.